Many of you have noticed that in my streams and in my webcam videos like this, that I've switched microphones. I'm using the Shure SM7b. That's not like me, I'm usually an electro voice guy, so what gives? In this video, we're going to talk about me kind of pseudo falling back in love with the Shure SM7b and some tips on making it sound better. So the Shure SM7b is a roughly $400 new dynamic microphone that is used a lot for music recordings and for some podcasts and radio shows, although the ones I see typically lean more towards electro voice than Shure, but you've got both available. And it is a dynamic microphone, which means that instead of requiring phantom power and basically always being listening for sound, the capsule is more or less activated by sound, which helps with noise floor and reducing background sound. And the SM7b is legendary for its background noise rejection and things like that. It's also legendary for its proximity effect, in that when you get up on the microphone, it actually sounds really warm and nice. It has a few different things. I actually fully reviewed this back in 2017 when Mike from Booth Junkies let me borrow his SM7b, so I have a link to the full review in the description because I don't want to repeat myself too much here. It has a couple switches on the back for a bass roll-off as well as an activation or a presence booster, which is basically like a treble boost. I have both of those off. I have it set to totally flat, and then I'm using the GoXLR for my processing, which we'll talk about in a moment. So my reasoning for switching to this microphone actually comes down to its shielding. It's actually really known for how well shielded it is from outside interference. A lot of people have been asking about this ferrite bead that has shown up on my XLR cable. I was running into some weird issue where when I switched to specifically the RE320, suddenly I was getting a bunch of EMI coming from my desktop whenever I was game streaming, because this is my normal like production setup, but I don't do a whole lot of streaming from here other than streamer news. When I game stream, I pivot over to this side where my video gaming setup is, and my PC, when it was running games, moving my microphone closer to it, I could literally move it closer and further away. After hours of diagnosing, trying to figure out where it was coming from, it was literally just my microphone getting closer to my desktop tower. It was picking up some EMI radiating out of the power supply or graphics card or something like that. The 320 was apparently not shielded enough to ignore that. The SM7b is, and I was already kind of getting curious about it again and wanted to try it again. I'm always trying new hardware and setups and things like that to try to, learn the most that I can to share with you guys. And so I wanted to try it again. So it was just kind of perfect timing that I had a reason to switch microphones again, and I wanted to try it out. And lo and behold, I fell in love with it all over again. What impresses me the most about it, because you may hear I mentioned the proximity effect where people talk about if you get right up on it, you start getting this warm, bassy sound. That's nice, but I already get a punchy, bassy, radio sound out of my electro voice mics. That's why they're my favorite microphones for desktop, broadcast use. I already love them for that purpose. The SM7b I actually started to like more after seeing both Potato Jet and Peter McKinnon pick them up and get natural sound out of them. Because most people go after the Markiplier sound or the Joe Rogan sound where it's overly compressed, there's no dynamic range, it sounds super boomy and bassy, the typical cliche podcast sound. I can hear it a mile away when someone has an SM7b and basically processes it exactly in the same way. I can't stand it. It's just not a sound I like. It's not natural. It doesn't sound great. And then Peter McKinnon picked one up, and immediately it sounded like his normal microphone recordings. And then Potato Jet did the same thing. It sounded natural and normal, and I was like, people can actually do this. Imagine that. So picking that up and playing with the processing settings here as well in my GoXLR, I was able to recreate what I think is a fairly natural sound for me. And this is what impresses me about it, is it can go for the radio sound or it can go for a more natural sound. Now, putting this in the same video with my in post-processing for my, that was redundant, my post-processing for my main shotgun mic, I use the Sennheiser MKH416. It's a completely different class of microphone. It's also literally a condenser microphone versus a dynamic. It sounds way better, but on its own, this sounds phenomenal, and it's pretty great. Now, I'm probably going to switch back to the RE20 at some point because I want to mess with that some more, and I'm always changing, but for the moment, I'm really enjoying just the natural sound I can get out of the SM7b while rejecting quite a bit more background noise than I'm used to. So let's talk about some tips to get the best sound out of your SM7b if you've just picked one up. First and foremost, you need great preamps. This is something you can sort of finagle or get around with other microphones, but the SM7b is one of the more gain-hungry microphones you're going to pick up for a desktop streaming setup, and you need great preamps for it. You need something like 50 dB of gain to really get proper levels out of this microphone. which most cheaper interfaces really can't provide without getting into digital gain or pushing the preamps to their limits, which starts to introduce a pretty hefty noise floor. Theoretically, if you're willing to push it in post, the Focusrite Scarlett 2i2 technically has the capacity to do this, but in my experience, once you start adding compression and things like that in post, after you've already like pushed it that far, you get too much hiss and noise floor and yada yada. I'm not a fan of it. So I reached out to Andrew from Podcastage to get his recommendations of his top 5 choices for interfaces that you might want to use with the SM7B, so that I have, someone else's who is actually, because I don't review a whole lot of interfaces myself, so I get someone's, pre-approved stamp of approval on these 5 interfaces, going from least expensive to most expensive: the Audient Evo, the Motu M2, Solid State Logic's 2 or 2 Plus, SSL2 2 Plus interfaces, the Arturia Audiofuse, or the Apollo Twin X. And then I'm throwing in, of course, the GoXLR, because the GoXLR can provide about 60 dB of gain, which is more than enough for the RE20, for the SM7B. You do not need a cloud lifter with it. It sounds phenomenal. Without it, you get clean gain, great levels, no problem. A lot of people jump to spending $20, $40 on an interface and then $125 on a cloud lifter because they spent too little on their interface, and the cloud lifter gives them 25 dB of extra gain that is cleaner. That just seems like a ridiculous strategy to me. You've spent the 40 plus the 120, you've spent enough money to have just gotten a good audio interface in the first place that actually powers your microphone properly in the first place. Band-aiding this solution just is not the way to go, IMO. So you need good preamps, you need a good interface. There's no getting around it. If you don't have that, if you can't afford it, buy a different microphone. Just get the Rode Procaster, the Pod mic, the Samson Q2U, and go from there. Secondly, let's talk about the proximity effect. So the proximity effect is a aspect of physics when it comes to a lot of microphones. My favorite RE20 doesn't actually have it, ironically enough, and that's because with my voice that already leans towards the bassier, deeper registers whenever I'm talking properly, I don't really need it, and I don't rely on it that much. But the proximity effect is basically the closer you get to the microphone, especially once within a few inches, it starts to get the tone, the color of your voice starts to change. It starts to get warmer and bassier. And this is useful when you're trying to like talk normally like I am right now, and then get up on it for a radio commercial. Things like that. And so that is one of the signature aspects of this microphone, even though my favorite microphone for this purpose, the RE20 specifically, does not do that. Little weird. So you can use that to your advantage, because if you want a more natural sounding sound for your day-to-day use of it, you keep a fair bit of distance from it. And all of the video comments on recent videos discussing the SM7B, everyone's just like, oh, you're not talking close to it. And all of my videos and streams with this microphone so far, there's maybe not 1.5 feet of space between me and the microphone, but there's at least like 8 or 9 inches here. I don't get right up on it because I don't want that effect, because people already complain about there being too much bass in my voice in my videos as is. It's just my voice. I'm not adding that in. I don't want to add more in. And obviously there's the bass roll-off switch you can flick on if that's a problem for you. But generally speaking, like, you have 2 different modes you can use it in. You can keep it, at a normal distance from your mouth and use it here, or especially if you want to keep the gain low for more background noise removal or whatever, you get right up on it and you just need to have it in your face the whole time. That leads into a discussion of proper pop filtering, because this microphone, for whatever reason, I did not expect that, but it is more sensitive to plosives than my RE20 and other microphones are. It has obviously the pop filter it's more of a windscreen, but built onto it here. But I was still having situations where even at this distance, I can cause plosives in this microphone. Now in the box, if you buy it new, it comes with a thicker shield that goes over top of it to more protect against plosives if you are getting right up on it for that proximity effect. And you can use that instead. And I've even seen one that's like a giant ball that sits on top of it that helps reduce plosives more. But you need to plan that out with this microphone, because if you are going to rely on having it super close to you, you're more than likely going to start plosiving on the mic. And that's going to be a bad experience for your viewers or listeners. And so you at least want... I keep seeing situations where people have taken this off and then put one of the fly swatter pop filters in front of it. It just seems ridiculous to me, unless you're in a radio situation where you have multiple people touching or using it and you don't want people spitting stuff getting into the foam. But overall, I would recommend, just if you're going to get up close on it, using the thicker, like, super filter that comes in the box with it. And if you don't have it, you can buy it separately, throw that on there, and you're good to go. Lastly, of course, let's talk about EQ and compression, your post-processing. Now, I recommend getting hardware that allows you to do this on the fly if you are looking to do live streaming or some sort of, on the fly production where you don't want to sit there and process it in post. This was something that I chased for a very long time. I made videos on it. I had a giant audio rack that was a multi-step audio chain that went from preamp to EQ to compressor to noise gate to my mixer. It was pretty crazy for the time, but it was a lot of fun. And then I settled on, for a while, I had a couple of DBX 286S channel strips running, which has a preamp, a EQ or a compressor, a noise gate, and a sort of EQ. It was more of a high frequency and low frequency enhance. I wasn't a fan of the EQ. The compressor was pretty good, but a lot of people can get that really dialed in and get the sound that they want and just never touch it, and it's always there. You never have to touch your audio in post or anything like that. I have since switched over to the GoXLR, which has a DSP, which is basically hardware software processing of audio. It's not done literally on hardware, but it's not done in post and computer software either. It's DSP. It's its own thing. And for that, on the equalizer, I keep in mind with every microphone, when you're setting up processing settings for it, you need to play to your microphone's strengths and weaknesses. And don't forget, it basically has equalizer settings on the back here with these switches in the treble boost and the bass roll off. So if it's too boomy, you can flick that off and get rid of some of that boominess with the bass roll off. And if you don't find it having enough clarity, you can flick up the presence boost, and that will do the job for most people. I wasn't fully agreeing with how it was sounded and wanted to just play around with my GoXLR settings. So my specific equalizer settings, I've actually reduced it from the big full multi-band EQ to the smaller, simpler 3-band EQ. I have bass set on 0, mids set to -1 to get rid of some of the muddiness, and then treble set to +3 to give me some more of that clarity. As again, I'm trying to sort of match it as close as I can, which is not close at all, to my MKH416, where I have both the bassy boominess and the clarity, and it sounds phenomenal. This setup seems to work for me. As far as the noise gate goes, I have it set to -55 dB, which is basically as low as it goes while still being on, because you don't need a ton with the SM7B already. And then compressor I have set, you can see on screen here. This will vary based on your talking levels and things like that, but mainly with your equalizer, you want to play to the microphone's strengths. So it already has a bit of a bass boost built into it, so you don't really want to add a bunch of bass in equalizing, because it's just going to come out boomy and probably gather complaints from your listeners. It does, however, carry a bit of muddiness in the mids IMO with the way the frequency curve works, and so you'll probably want to take some out there. The general expected rule of equalizing is that you subtract before you add. So if something sounds bad, instead of enhancing or adding to it, you take away from it first. So for example, this microphone sounded a little muddy with the way I had it set up. So instead of adding a bunch of extra stuff, like instead of adding a whole bunch on both sides, I take away the mids, which gets rid of some of that muddiness and keeps the clarity. I still did feel the need to bump the treble up a couple notches, so I could get the clarity here. I could maybe settle on +2 instead of +3 now, but this is where I have it going for now. If you find it that you are coming up a little too high pitch, then maybe take away a little bit of treble or turn down the presence boost on here or what have you. It all depends on what you're working in with. And if you're full on proximity effects rolling with the warm bassiness here, then you'll want to, cater a little bit different there. You may need to boost treble a little bit and turn down the bass a little bit so that you have a nice balance, so that you don't just come off as woo, 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 woo. I am not an EQ master. It is one of those things that I can spend hours tearing my hair out over and still not end up with the results on. And so I just know how to find super simple ways of getting a basic sound. I don't expect you to come out of this an EQ master, just some general ideas of how to get good sound out of SM7B and a quick update as to why I'm using it and why I've fallen in love with it all over again. Hope you enjoyed today's video. Let me know what you think about the SM7B. Is it overrated? Are people using it wrong? Should you not buy it when you have a $20 interface? Let me know in the comment section down below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe for more tech education and stream guides. I'm your stream professor, EposVox. I'll see you next time.